Hey folks, I know it's been a while trying to do the 10 days of DS, but sometimes life and professional stuff kind of preempts some of my videos, and so anyway, without further ado, I am back. Les here from 6S1, and what we're going over this morning, well, it's morning here. It's about 9 a.m. for me. What we're going over right now is some things about posing in DS, and I'm going to keep this real fast and straightforward and simple. But there are some interesting little things that I wanted to touch on that I think a lot of folks who maybe are a little apprehensive about posing could really benefit from, and maybe folks who are kind of old hat to posing figures might dig picking up a few tricks here and there as well. So what we have going on here is this little scene where I have two characters in the scene seated at a table, sort of a conversational looking image, and there are a number of little nuanced things that I want to touch on here. Let's take a look at, let's start out with his hand, and as I do this, I'm just going to mention each of the little techniques that I'm doing, things that maybe that might not have dawned on folks to try or whatever. I'll right click over his hand, for instance, to select it. Right click and then go in the menu that comes up to select a body part. And then once I have that, I'll frame it over here with this button. So now I can get in nice and close and see that. So I'm going to zoom back out just a little tiny bit. Something that I think is a little foreboding to a lot of folks is trying to do sort of delicate touches in poses. But I wanted to show that really it's not that bad. Now, if you use the universal tool, which I tend to use either that or the rotate tool, you can do just so much so easily with that. The nice thing about the universal tool is it really is a move, rotate, and scaling tool all in one. So any of these curved lines you see are going to rotate along that particular axis. So red being X, green being Y, and blue being Z. And if you think about that, a lot of folks may not, like in dealing with like product testing and things like that through the years, and just doing a lot of support and helping people learn how to do this stuff, it's surprising to me kind of how often folks may not think about, like we're used to seeing these comfortable names like bend, twist, and side to side, but really those are just renames of X, Y, and Z rotate. Everything has to rotate along one of these axes, and it makes it, I think, a little easier to work with when you really are aware of that and you think about it. So here, looking at this finger, okay, we can see, especially if I change this tool, which this is one of those little things I want to point out, is the tool settings here. You have world and local coordinates. So if we're working with local coordinates, that's going to change this tool and all of these tools so that those rotations, particularly rotations, are interesting for this one, that those rotations correspond with the way the rigging is set up. So without trying to get into something that's kind of confusing there, what that does is the circles that you see here, okay, let's see if I can simplify this a little bit. The circles that you see correspond to the direction that you can bend the joint in. So here we can grab that blue circle and it's going to follow that arc. Or if you were to try and move on any of the other ones, it should follow that arc. Now, I am on the second joint of a finger, which has those locked off, so that you can't bend it in a way that that would break it. So if we go to the first joint of the index finger, though, you'll see that those are all named and visible. So we could move them, rotate them on each of those axes. So looking here, I can see my middle finger. I want to make a slight adjustment to. So I'm going to go to that first joint and just rotate that up a little tiny bit. And then I think probably the ring finger, I'm going to do kind of the same. And I'm of the mind that it's better to have the meshes slightly, I mean very slightly, it's a very delicate thing, but very slightly intersect. Say the thumb into the fork into the index finger, and so on. Because if there is just the tiniest, I mean, I can't emphasize enough, a very tiny amount of intersection there. Okay, unless you're up very, very, very close up on it, like this close up, having that little bit of intersection will help create a little bit of a feeling of compression there, and when you render, the shadows, ambient occlusion, things like that, will kind of fill in between the body part and the objects and things, so that it feels like there's a sense of weight there, a little bit more of a connection than if things are not touching completely. I would rather have them touching completely than potentially having a gap between them that allows light to bleed through and create unrealistic shadows, or hot spots, things like that. So that's a quick look at this hand. Now, the other thing that I want to show while I'm in here for the moment about posing is, and this is actually what I was thinking about when I started this video, was I'm in the process of doing a new pose for her with the hand where she's sitting here, and I wanted a more conversational position than what I previously had. And I want to stretch her fingers out so that they lay flat on the table. Obviously, they've all been posed to this degree already. And the way that I can do that very quickly to restore all those fingers to their default position without trying to restore the entire figure, this is a neat little trick. If you look at the way I have my interface set up for DaZ Studio, there are certain tabs, and I think in a previous video I even mentioned this, the tabs that I've chosen to keep ready and on the surface for myself. So I have her hand selected. I'm going to go into the Scene tab, and if we scroll down, you'll see that the body part that's selected is highlighted. So then under the hand, we have all these finger-related joints. And what I'm doing, what you just saw me do, is I'll click on this joint, the left thumb, then I'll hold Shift and click all the way down here. Now this is something that for poser users who may be watching this thinking, well, I want to maybe pick up some tips that'll help me convert from Poser to DaZ Studio. This is something you actually can't do inside Poser. One of the little things that's different in DS that I really dig. I was kind of a naysayer about DS for many, many years, but I've kind of come around in the last probably 6 months, and as I have, just like with anything, there are some things I like better in Poser, some things I like better in DS. But one of the things that I really, really like in DS, and Poser guys, if you're listening, you know who you are, folks behind the scenes. You really want to borrow this. This is cool stuff. One of the things that I really prefer in DS is this ability that to select multiple body parts and manipulate them at once, which I've talked about in a previous video. But here's a quick way. Let's say we want to just return all of these to their default position. I'll click on the first body part here, then Shift and click to select all of these, and then I'll hit Control E on my keyboard. Now, Poser users might remember Control E restores a body part in Poser. It also restores a body part in Dash Studio, but here we have multiple body parts selected. So if we hit Control E, bam, there you go. You see the hand is, all those finger joints are returned to their default position. So now to finish posing this, I can continue working with the hand. And you'll also notice that I have the hand pinned. Whereas in Poser, I would use probably IK. In Dash Studio, it's a little different with this pinning system. It takes a little getting used to. If you're used to Poser IK, or if you're someone like myself who works in kind of the broader 3D industries and you use things like Maya or 3D Studio Max or XXI or Cinema 4D, any of these sort of maybe a little more robust professional level programs, in those you're probably used to using these much more what's the word to put it, feature rich IK systems. So Poser and DS both have their own flaws, I think, when it comes to implementations of what should be inverse kinematics, IK inverse kinematics. But without getting into a whole technical discussion of that, let's just say there's some differences between the two, and they both have their strengths and weaknesses, and I'll use them in both. I'm very much a believer that you use every tool at your disposal, and IK in Poser or pinning in Dash Studio are both great tools when used in the right situation. So here you'll see that I have the hand pinned, and we can turn that pinning on or off here, or we can disable it temporarily, which I like. If we turn that off, then everything becomes rotational. With pinning turned on, it's kind of like IK. Like I said, it's DS's version of IK, I think, where I can move that part, and things upstream will try to follow. Pardon me. So I want to finish out this pose by disabling pinning for a moment and making a couple of small rotations. One of the things you'll find that while you have pinning turned on is that maybe some things won't rotate quite the way you would think they should. So I find that pinning is a great way to get things generally into place, and a lot of times you'll end up turning it off once you're there and finishing out with some tiny rotations. So the last thing that I want to do in building this pose is give the fingers a more natural position. And here you'll see I am keeping my scene window open so that I can quickly select things from here instead of having to always select it in the viewport. I tend to go back and forth a little bit between selecting in the viewport. Like if I see that I can, like right now I don't have the tool covering things up. This is what I mean. A lot of times, let's say if I'm zoomed out, it's hard to select a body part through that tool because your mouse will go over parts of the tool and want to to use those handles that are presented inside the tool instead of selecting things beneath it. So that can be a little tricky. If we zoom in, we might be able to do a click selection, and that's fine. I use that a lot too. Again, every tool at your disposal, that sort of thing. But at times when you want to quickly select back and forth through different body parts, especially areas with a lot of different joints like hands, with the fingers, then I find that it's really handy to keep the scene window up, or scene tab, view window tab, I'm horrible about keeping up with about keeping straight with terminology, so forgive me for that. Hopefully it doesn't get too confusing. But I'll keep the scene tab up so that I can quickly click through my hierarchy of a figure and make my selections so that I don't have to spend time hunting and trying to fight with a potentially dense scene. Okay. So, and again, just like on the other figure with the fork, I do want to have just the slightest little bit of intersection into the table with her hand. So I'm going to switch back to world coordinates because sometimes it's easier to think about things um, in these terms. Basically what this means is world coordinates are X, Y, and Z for the entire scene, for the world. Um, so with that in mind, Y is always up, Z is always forward to back, X is always side to side. Whereas if we're using local, you see how the manipulator here turns so that those correspond to the local rotational axis of the body part. Again, forgive me if that sounds like some jargon or whatever that's maybe a little confusing to folks who just want to get in there and make some cool images and stuff. But I think that expanding a little bit of knowledge about that kind of stuff is a good thing, because as you learn those things, your use of a program like this will become a little more intuitive. You'll understand certain things a little bit more, and which in turn will end up making it much more efficient. Um, just makes for a much smoother experience when you're trying to create a piece of artwork. So here I'm going to switch back to using world coordinates, and I'm going to lift this hand up ever so slightly. It's a nice delicate little change here. And then I'm going to take a look here. You can see I've positioned my camera almost really kind of inside the table. And then from there, I'm just going to rotate it down ever so slightly. And sometimes using the dials, the sliders over here, is a little bit better. You can get some more nuanced sort of control with them. I'm actually not a big fan of using sliders and dials for much of anything. I prefer direct manipulation, as though I'm using a puppet, or say you've got I have a small toy collection, right? So say I've got a Star Wars toy or something on my desk, I'll sit and actually manipulate that. So if I'm doing, because I do a lot of traditional art, if I'm doing a piece of fan art or something, or a commission piece for someone, and it's of something that I have a toy I can use as reference for, I'll sit and pose the toy maybe, just to kind of get an idea of some things. But I'm doing it directly with my hands. And I find that manipulating things inside the viewport using these tools, once you get around kind of the awkwardness of this idea of three-dimensional space cast onto a two-dimensional surface, meaning your screen, once you get around that, manipulating these things directly, to me, feels much more natural than making a selection and going to sliders and using all those. It's just I've always thought that was a very kind of cumbersome sort of thing. Now it has its use. It's handy for making small adjustments, in my opinion. But very rarely do I do actual top to bottom posing using just these sliders here, or dials as they're called. And posers are really the same thing. I much prefer direct manipulation. So here, I'm just going to move this hand, and you'll see this hand also is pinned. And I'm just going to make some slight movements here. Now I'm going to pin her chest, or chest upper, this body part's called. I'm going to pin that, so now when I move this hand, it should, in theory, there we go, leave the torso intact without moving. And actually, I think I would rather pin the collar. So let's pin those. And that's kind of, from just on an experience level, sort of the difference between using IK in Poser versus DaZ Studios. That in Poser you have very set IK chains, and they are set as they are. Whereas in DaZ Studio, we could turn on that pinning per body part and kind of be able to lock certain things at certain times and then turn that back off. So it's kind of neat. It's a neat system. Maybe sometime I'll go into some of the things that I find with it that are maybe not as beneficial as what this seems. So for this purpose and this shot, it's actually really useful. So there, I have tweaked out her pose. Let's give her just a little bit more of a gesture here with her head. Okay. Maybe see what we can do with that. No, I don't really like that. Don't like that change, so I'll just undo that. So now let's zoom back out. The last thing I'm going to touch on here that really is more of an art direction thing than it is a matter of DS as a particular tool is the subject of eye lines. If you have a couple of characters in a shot who are should be in a conversation or sharing some kind of a moment, then you really want to make sure you pay very close attention to eye lines. What that means is, if you were to imagine a pair of lines coming from a character's eyes, the lines coming from the eyes, the direction those eyes are pointed in, should go to whatever the character is focused on. If they don't, like for instance, if I just moved her head over, then it doesn't feel like she's talking to him at all, or that he's talking to her. Or maybe he is talking to her because his eye line does tend to go more toward her, but at best this would feel like she's ignoring him, or there's something off screen that she's paying more attention to. But here, I'll undo that and go back. They seem to be engaged in conversation, or there's some attention being given to each other there. So little things like that, I think those things make a pretty big difference in poses. And it's stuff that if you watch movies, or especially animated movies, or you look at, of course I'm pretty deep into comic books. You look at the art in comic books, you'll see this represented over and over and over and over. In either one, if you take a film that you like, especially animated movies, and you pause it anytime you see two characters speaking to each other, there's probably a good eye line set up between them. And if there isn't, then there's probably a reason that eye line's being broken in the context of the shot. And it's just a matter of storytelling and thinking through your posing to help use the pose to convey that sense of story. So anyway, that's it for this installment, and I hope that that in the course of this sort of scattershot look inside a scene that I'm working on right now, that it kind of gives you some tips and tricks and things to apply in your own artwork and your own use of DaZ Studio that are useful. So anyway, if you like this or you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Remember, I'm Les Garner. We're 6S1 Media. You can find us at 6s1.com. You can also find a lot of our stuff now in the store at 6s1 Media, 6s1.com/store, or at CG Bytes, or at Renderosity. So anyway, that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.